Welcome, wargamers and warlocks of all stripes, to the dark labs of the mortal realms, because today we are diving headfirst into the maniacal world of the Skaven, specifically the genius tinkerers of Clans Skryre. These are the brilliant and highly unstable mad scientists of the Skaven race who blend ingenuity with Warpstone-fueled technology. Unlike the other clans that we have covered this week, the Skryre brings a more explosive approach to the battlefield, and while every Skaven faction is dangerous in some way, the Clans Skryre are one of those that blend their feral rat cunning with a penchant for world-ending machines and eldritch power. They got an immense amount of love in the latest Skaven release, lots of new toys, lots of new lore to explore, and I am very excited to tackle this video. Introduce the units, the heroes, that kind of stuff that you and I get to interact with on the table and learn more about what drives the Clans Skryre. Now, one thing I'd like to add up top before we get started, if you're interested in this video and looking for any GW stuff, please consider using one of the affiliate links in my description down below. Through that link tree, you'll see all the different savings that I have for you, how much money you'll save, and every time you use those links, it directly supports me, my wife, our cats, the whole channel, and I am so grateful for each and every one of you who does. Big shout out to Baron of Dice, who was kind enough to design a set of 2+ tough specific dice. So if you want to support the channel and get something fun for yourself, please consider heading over to Baron of Dice. Lastly, if you're getting started in Age of Sigmar 4th edition, you want to learn how to play the game, go check out Goonhammer. It's an awesome blog and online resource with tons of tactics, painting tips, model reviews, everything a young claw lord would need to start learning how to play Skaven on the tabletop. They've also launched Goonhammer TV here on YouTube, and I highly suggest you go give them a subscribe and check them out. For those of you who are fairly new to Age of Sigmar or the Great Clans, Clans Skryre stands apart from the other Skaven clans through their mastery of both engineering and magic, particularly with the volatile power that comes from Warpstone. Skryre clans don't deal in simple brute strength or numbers. They deal in devastating machinery and destructive arcane devices. But there is a Venn diagram, meaning they can hire a bunch of clan rats if they need to, they can do whatever they need to get the war machines in there, but in general, this is the tech-focused faction. Much like the rest of Skavendom, the Clan Skryre will work alongside other clans, but their contributions to battle tend to come in the form of lethal machines, specialized weaponry, and they often see other clans not just as sometimes allies and enemies, but as disposable guinea pigs, test subjects for their new war inventions. And this makes them a vital part of that Skaven ecosystem we discussed in the Blight City video. Verminus can bring numbers. Skryre can bring something like a war machine, but the forces need each other to function. You need rats to push the war machine up and to have a meaningful breach. Once you get the wall down, someone has to be able to go in and actually fight. Likewise, an endless sea of Skaven could really benefit from having a war machine that can go through a wall. The Clan Skryre's power lies in its warlock, a combination of mad scientist, warlord, and arcane practitioner. And honestly, that's a good note to start on because these are the most technologically advanced Chaos faction at the moment. We'll see if we ever get Chaos Dwarves where they land on stuff. But, that being said, even though it's all technological, the titles and the structure of Clan Skryre is modeled after like a witch coven. In fact, the groups of leaders are even called engine covens, which is fun. It continues mixing that, mysticism and science and all this kinds of stuff. And warlocks run the show, developing everything from warp lightning cannons to doom wheels. They view the hordes of clan rats from Verminus as perfect fodder, easy to replace and expandable when one of their weapons go haywire, which does happen a lot. The Clan Skryre don't care about body count. In fact, they often see more dead Skaven as a data point for improving their machines than anything else. All right, so Skryre logic is if 1,000 Skaven die, but the experiment advances, it's a win even if the battle was lost. If you debut a new type of cannon and it does its job, but then the infantry can't finish the battle and they lose, the experiment regarding the cannon was still a resounding success. Now, like all the great clans of the Skaven, they do revere the Great Horned Rat, and this was sort of an interesting thing I was hoping to learn more about. How does a subfaction that is kind of focused on science and technology revere a deity? Well, they view the Great Horned Rat as the Great Dark Innovator, a mind that's made of cogs and wires and warpstone sparking synapses, that spends eternity doing nothing but thinking up new ways to kill and ruin its enemies. And that is essentially the ideal that each engine coven works towards. They see the creativity that they have as a divine spark of destruction. When they design a new thing, when they are inspired to create, that is a manifestation of their God's will here in the realms. They are obsessed with whether or not they can do a thing instead of whether or not they should. So you'll see them all over the battlefield, right? Tinkering with machines, trying to increase their killing power, and further their experiments. And yes, sometimes what they're creating blows up or melts down. That's all just part of the educational experience. And like I said, it's described in terms of its structure as a witch coven, but this is actually a technocracy. You rise and fall in stature based on how quickly you can learn the technology and innovate upon it. If you bring something useful to your warlord, you rise in favor. If your inventions let them down, you're going to end up being the next test subject. Which means, like the rest of Skaven, there's a lot of opportunity for backstabbing, duplicity, espionage, right? Stealing somebody else's plans, and so on. And so let's get into the good stuff, right? What you will actually see on the battlefield. Now, there's not much lore for them individually because there's so many units in the Skaven battle tome, but I'll highlight what makes each of them fun or unique. But keep in mind, this is what actually makes it to the battlefield, and for everything that you see on the table, there are, theoretically, millions of Skaven on the back end designing new weapons, better warp lightning cannons, faster doom wheels, all that kind of stuff. So starting with the heroes, I'm going to put these into one grand category known as the Warlocks. They are the heart and soul of Clans Skryre. They are the masterminds who devise all of Skryre's warp technology. We called them earlier engine covens, and at the top is the Arch Warlock, the leader of the clan. They earned this position through the creation of devastating weaponry and a deep knowledge of the arcane. They deliver on what they promise. And I want you to think of this as your head of research. He'll manage all of the covens below him and maybe steal their ideas and innovate on them. They go to battle in their Skaven mech suits, basically. It's basically power armor with a built-in flamethrower. And on their back is a Warpstone accelerator, which essentially makes them into a crude wizard. Instead of having the natural ability to unleash like an arcane bolt or something like that, they're able to reproduce that effect through mechanical means. Now, immediately below them is the general pool of warlocks, the most numerous of which are the engineers. These are the minds that create, test, and use the arcane devices of the Skaven. This is your general sub-hero. Within that pool of general sub-heroes, there are some specialities, however. The Warplock Galvanier is a new hero, and they're essentially engineers that are obsessed with warp lightning specifically. The type of gun that they love in the Skaven arsenal is known as the Warp Volt Scourger. We'll talk about that later. But it's essentially anti-cavalry weapons that fire lightning arcs all around and electrify the battlefield. The second subtype of engineer is the Warplock Bombardier. And they're essentially the same thing, but they are focused entirely on artillery, so think warp lightning cannons and the like. So you have engineers, those are your general researchers. You have people focused on warp lightning, other specialists focused on bombardments and artillery. And together with the Arch Warlock, this is how you have your leadership crew. This is how you dictate what your clan is studying and researching and developing and able to sell to other clans. Moving into the various units of the Clan Skryre, we have the Doom Wheel, possibly one of the most iconic units in the Skaven book, period. It is a massive warp-powered wheel of destruction. Okay, basically it's a hamster wheel that has a bunch of Skaven slaves inside of it who are running wild, and it has these two huge warp lightning generators on the sides that unleash arcs of deadly energy. As it gains speed, it essentially creates friction, almost like a warp lightning version of friction amongst itself, which then randomly it will just barf out to everyone around it. It makes them highly unstable, very dangerous. But the thing is, though, while they are likely to, detonate and devastate themselves, seeing one of these things plow into a rank and file bunch of infantry is just meant to destroy the morale of the enemy. So the Doom Wheel is always going to be a staple. Next up are the Storm Fiends, and these are examples of what happens when the Skaven collaborate, specifically with the Master Molders of the Clans Molder, who we talked about in our last video. Basically, they put their minds together to make Storm Fiends. So the way it works is you take a Rat Ogre that we explored in that video, you cut off his hands, replace them with weapons, or I should say a weapons team worth of guns on his arms, and there you go, that's a Storm Fiend. But there's a drawback. The Rat Ogres are not bright. They can't be trained to do anything than maybe swing their arms and use these big guns like they're clubs. So they need help. Now, I mentioned in that Clans Molder video, the Skaven method of adding RAM to their computer, to use little other speak, is to graft another brain on. This is where an entirely second creation of the Master Molders comes in. The Brain Rats. Tiny, shriveled monsters that are all brain power, no body. They are grafted into the backs of the Storm Fiends, and they ride on their backs to guide the weapon systems, to point out targets, to give them some sentience above base instinct. So imagine if you had an ancillary brain that gave you the same dopamine hit when you point your arm and, shoot warp fire at an enemy that the Rat Ogre would normally get if he's up close and personal clawing at them with his claws. It's just ways of manipulating the more primitive mind to get them to use the weapons that you have, which has always made them a really interesting mix of creepy, gross body horror science and just really cool. Another new kit that we got are the Acolyte Globadiers. These are the rank in between your base clan rat and your engineer. You're on a dedicated path to the Clans Skryre, but you yourself maybe haven't created anything of significance yet or had any big military gain in order to kind of thrust you up to the rank of being an engineer. So in the meantime, they experiment in making their own equipment and go to war by throwing glass containers filled with gaseous Warpstone runoff. And kind of how I imagine this, right, is sort of a do the best you can and work with what you got kind of mentality. So I imagine the Warpstone dust that they get is sort of like a byproduct of other manufacturing that the clan does. And you scrape together enough, of this stuff to weaponize it. And then you can go to your Arch Warlock or the next engineer in charge and be like, look, I designed this amazing use of Warpstone powder as well as, security equipment to keep myself breathing as I use it. So you're trying, again, to accrue inventions and demonstrations of your prowess with what you have on hand. That's how you prove yourself to become an engineer, and hopefully from an engineer to an Arch Warlock. But I will say the descriptions of what this stuff, this gaseous attack does to you is savage. If you inhale it, you dissolve from within. It accelerates rapid decay. And so you're clawing at your rotting throat to get air into your lungs that have already decayed while you're still alive. Which sounds rough. Next up are the iconic Warp Lightning cannons, and these act as the heavy artillery in the Skaven arsenal. They are unstable to the core, powered by the essence of raw Warpstone, and the cannon blasts are somewhat unpredictable, but when they hit, they annihilate stuff. Crews are always trying to kind of juice up their engines, their cannons as much as they can to get as much damage as possible, which also sometimes sees them explode. Another new kit that we got that I actually really like are the Warp Spark weapon batteries. This is the multi-kit we got where you can have 3 teams of 2 and you can have them carry a weapon team of some kind. And think of these as acolytes that did something right and are having a good day, right? They're just weapon crews, but it signifies more and more access to the raw technology. Really quickly, I'm going to go through the different weapon options just to kind of give you a sense of what they are. First off, there's the Rattling Gun, a Gatling gun that spews Warpstone bullets at high speed, high rates of fire, low accuracy, gotta love it. There's the Warp Fire Throwers, which deliver arcs of superheated warp flame that basically can melt anything to cinders. And I like it because it exemplifies a different way that the Skaven are tapping into Warpstone as an energy source. And lastly is the newest weapon type that was added to the Skaven arsenal, the Warp Volt Obliterator. These are initially designed as scaled-down warp lightning cannons. Like, the original designer blew up his entire section of the Warrens up in experimentation, but it broadcast the idea to all the other Skryre Arch Warlocks. And so all of them were sitting like, man, that was a big explosion. He was trying to do what? A warp lightning cannon on your wrist. That sounds rad. And they all started trying to reverse engineer, but they actually made it work. And so yeah, the idea is it is a portable warp lightning cannon. Now, it's not wrist-sized yet, but it is small enough for a team of 2 to be able to walk around with it. There's the Warplock Jezzails. These are long-range snipers of the Skaven army, and they essentially charge up and accelerate Warpstone gases and use that almost like a Gauss rifle, if you will, and fire off a round strong enough to pierce inches of steel. It takes a team of 2 to operate, and these guns are immensely expensive to produce. And so there's this pressure if you're a Warplock Jezzail to deliver. You have to be able to cripple priority targets with accuracy. You have to justify your cost. Next up is the Rattling Warp Blaster, a war machine that was featured in the release trailer for 4th edition. And it's made possible by the creation of the Warp Spark Accelerator. Now, the only thing notable here, it's a giant cannon on wheels or whatever. The thing that's really notable here is that this was designed when the different clans of Skryre were all forced to work together to achieve the Skaven Doom. So this is an example of a new piece of tech that was come into existence simply by the fact that they were all forced to collaborate. But really the big thing here is that accelerator engine it has. I hope to see more inventions with that in the future. Next up is the Doom Flayer, built upon the scavenged dwarven technology of holds that they have once conquered. These are essentially machines that are meant to bring murder to the enemy rather than from a distance. And they are exactly what it seems like. Giant balls of whirling blades that just tear straight into the enemy in melee. And as you can imagine, the drivers of these things do not tend to live long. However, they do present themselves as quick ways to power, so low-ranking Skaven, they just go for it. I don't want to have to wait, to become an engineer and then maybe a bombardier and then maybe shoot my shot for being an Arch Warlock. I just want to ride cool machines. I just want to play around with the tech. You can do this. You won't live long, but you'll have a good time. And lastly is the Warp Grinder. Simply put, this is a mining team. The Warp Grinder is a giant warpstone-tipped drill that they can use to burrow through the cosmos. Once they arrive to the battlefield, usually with some friends, that drill becomes a powerful weapon. One that, usually by its nature, pops up behind enemy lines. Reading this just made it occur to me that I need to do a dedicated video on knotholes, but it is interesting nonetheless. And so let's end this video like I end all of them by asking the question, why is this cool? Why is Clans Skryre cool amongst the other Skaven clans? Well, first of all, they got so many incredibly cool new kits that it's just kind of hard to argue with how cool they are. I think the anecdote that best fits this has to do with the video game. I remember the first time I saw the Doom Wheel animated in the Total War Warhammer series, and it was incredibly cool because there's just something about the terror of these things that look like they shouldn't work but they do, that when you see it tearing through a group of people, it sounds absolutely horrific. And that's part of what makes Skryre fun, is just imagining how terrifying these things would be if you were on the ground looking at them. As many folks felt when they saw the AOS 4.0, launch cinematic, seeing the Skaven Tide set in motion is deeply fascinating. We get to see several Clans Skryre units in action in that video, and it seems absolutely apocalyptic. And that's what makes the Clans Skryre so fun, is that everything that they do seems absolutely unstoppable, even though it's all held together with, thumbtacks, toothpicks, and glue. You feel like the apocalypse is upon you. And while there's always a chance that your inventions will blow up in your face, there's also the chance for glory and prize and profit. But friends, those are just my thoughts on the Clans Skryre. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below. How do you imagine your engine coven looking? Do you have a name for your Arch Warlock? And if so, what kind of inventions do they favor themselves? For me personally, if I had to pick my top ones, I'm going to have to go with the Doom Wheel as well as the new weapons teams. I absolutely adore those models. But friends, that'll do it for me today. Thank you so much for watching and hanging out with me, and I will catch you in my next video. Happy wargaming.